It is said that, in the heart of the vast desert, amidst endless sands, there lay a wondrous city, its walls towering high and built entirely of pure copper. This city only appears to those who draw near it, and whoever lays eyes on it is struck with awe, their mind overwhelmed by its sheer beauty. A city that tempts any human to enter it, drawn by the legends that spread about its treasures. Some say it was built by the hands of Jinn, and others claim that it was the prophet Solomon, peace be upon him, who ordered its construction to imprison the rebellious Jinn within. For that reason, no man ever dared to enter it. Any who tried met a certain and tragic end. But the years passed, and the army of Musa ibn Nusayr managed to penetrate the city and uncover its secrets in one of the strangest journeys ever mentioned in the annals of Arab history. Many historians claimed it truly happened. Others dismissed it as myth. As for me, I will tell you the tale, and you are free to believe it or not. Welcome. Let me take you today on the journey of Musa ibn Nusayr to the city of copper. Our story begins in ancient times, specifically in the 6th century, in one of the royal palaces. One day, the princes, ministers, and courtiers gathered in the king's hall to discuss affairs of life. During the discussion, a topic arose that sparked a heated debate, dividing the attendees into two camps, those in favor and those against, with voices rising throughout the hall. When the king heard the commotion, he came to understand the cause of the dispute. One of the men stepped forward and said, "O king, your princes deny the existence of the city of copper, the one that Solomon, peace be upon him, ordered to be built." Now this king had a deep fascination with everything related to Solomon, peace be upon him. As soon as he heard those words, his eyes lit up. He sat down and said, "Tell me, what is the story?" And so the man began. Several centuries ago, a group of Arab sailors embarked on a trading voyage. They lost their way at sea, and the ship eventually cast them ashore on a strange island. When they disembarked, they were greeted by a tribe of short-statured, naked, dark-skinned people who spoke an incomprehensible language, like a community completely cut off from the world. The sailors tried to communicate with the islanders, but to no avail. They couldn't understand a word. However, the king of that tribe spoke several languages, including Arabic. One day, while they were still on the island, they saw the local fishermen at work. To their astonishment, the fishermen were pulling from their nets copper flasks, sealed and covered with lead. When they opened one of those flasks, a thick column of black smoke burst forth, rising until it touched the sky. Moments later, from the heart of that smoke emerged a creature, giant in form, yet shaped like a man. And then, suddenly, with a voice that echoed with terror, the Jinn screamed, "Forgiveness, O prophet of God, mercy and pardon." Then it looked around in panic and vanished. The scene was shocking to the sailors. They couldn't understand what they had witnessed, nor how such a being could simply appear and disappear like that. But the strangest part of it all was that the islanders showed no fear or surprise. They behaved as if it were a normal, everyday occurrence. When the sailors asked them about it, the locals explained that they were used to such events. It happened quite often. They said those copper flasks were made by the prophet Solomon, peace be upon him, who crafted hundreds of them to imprison rebellious Jinn and then had them cast into the depths of the sea. And if one of those flasks ever got tangled in a fisherman's net and was opened, the Jinn would escape, believing he was still in Solomon's time. Once he realized he was in a different era, he would flee immediately, fearing punishment. At that moment, the king interrupted the story, eyes gleaming with fascination, and said, "I want to see those flasks with my own eyes and release a Jinn myself." The prince replied, "But my lord, those flasks are found in the city of copper, and we don't know its exact location. All we know is that it lies in the far north of Africa." So the king ordered him to deliver a letter to his brother, the governor of the neighboring lands, hoping he could help locate the city. And so the prince set out, preparing his gear, taking the letter, and traveling to those distant lands. As soon as the governor read the king's message, he said, "You must go to Musa, the great adventurer and commander of the armies in Al-Andalus. He knows this land well, and may be the only one capable of helping you." The prince then sought out Musa, carrying the king's letter, which ordered him to personally undertake the mission and to hand over his rule to the prince until his return. As soon as Musa received the letter, he said, "I hear and obey." He then summoned a traveler who claimed to know the path to the city of copper and asked him about its location. The traveler replied, "The city is hidden. It only appears to those who come close to its walls. It lies somewhere near the Sea of Darkness, but it cannot be seen unless you are very near." He then offered to accompany Musa on the journey, and Musa agreed. And so the expedition began. Musa, the traveler, and an army of 1,000 soldiers set out, carrying supplies enough to last them a whole year. They marched toward the fabled city of copper. After several days of journeying deep into the desert, they came upon a grand palace, standing alone in the middle of the sands. Its walls were massive, its gates wide open, and there was no sign of guards. They entered cautiously, only to find themselves before a long staircase made of a rare type of marble no one had ever seen before. The palace walls were made of pure gold, inlaid with precious stones. They searched for any living soul within the palace to speak with, but found none. It was completely deserted. In the center of the palace, they found a marble plaque inscribed with words in Greek. The traveler read them, then translated. It was a poem. "O you who reached this palace after great toil, know that those before you vanished into the void. This is a place for those who understand, not for those who merely ask. He who enters without wisdom becomes a lesson for those who follow." Musa left the plaque in its place, and they continued their journey. Not long after, they came upon an enormous dome with 8 doors. Each door was made of sandalwood, sealed with golden nails, except for one, which was open. They entered cautiously and found themselves inside the tomb of the palace's owner. Beside him lay another inscribed plaque, which read, "I owned 4,000 red horses and married 1,000 daughters of kings. I fathered 1,000 sons, all mighty men. I lived 1,000 years in endless luxury. I amassed more wealth than the rulers of the world could ever dream of. I believed my kingdom would never end, until the reality of desire struck me. And if you ask who I am Cush, son of Shaddad, son of the great Adel." From these words Musa grasped a harsh lesson, a warning against arrogance and the fate of those who forget the divine. Out of respect for the sanctity of death, he ordered his soldiers to leave immediately, and they continued the march. 3 more days into the desert, they reached a massive watchtower. Musa commanded his troops to hold their positions while he ascended the tower with the traveler. There, they found a statue of a sentinel made entirely of copper. On his shield, words were engraved in Greek. "O you who have reached this place, if you do not know the way to the city of copper, rub the knight's palm, and he will point you in the right direction." Musa rubbed the copper knight's hand, and suddenly the statue's arm moved, pointing in a direction completely opposite to the one they had been following. At last, they had found their first real clue to the location of the city of copper. Musa and the traveler descended from the tower, and he gave the order for the army to march in the direction indicated by the copper sentinel. They marched for several more days, until they came upon a tall pillar made of black stone. As they approached, they were struck with horror at the sight before them. There was a strange creature buried in the sand up to its arms, but this was no ordinary creature. It had 4 arms, 2 resembling human limbs, and the other 2 like those of a beast, ending in sharp claws. 3 eyes, 2 mirrored like polished glass, and the third like the eye of a leopard. Its skin was pitch black, and its hair flowed like that of a wild stallion. Everyone froze in place, paralyzed by fear. Musa turned to the traveler and asked, "What is that creature?" The traveler, equally stunned, replied, "This is the first time in my life I've seen anything like this, but I will trust in God and approach it." He stepped forward cautiously and spoke to the creature. "Who are you, and what is your story?" The creature replied in a deep, gravelly voice, "I am a Jinn named Dahish, son of Alamash. I was condemned to blindness and imprisoned here until God wills my release." Realizing that the Jinn was blind and bound, the traveler relaxed slightly and asked, "Why were you imprisoned here? What did you do?" The Jinn let out a fiery sigh and said, "Long ago, in the time when the prophet Solomon, peace be upon him, ruled, this Jinn Dahish served under a tyrant king who commanded nearly 1,000,000 rebellious jinn. Dahish was in charge of them all. One day, word of this king and his unholy army reached the prophet Solomon. The prophet sent him a letter, ordering him to abandon sorcery and disbelief. If he refused, Solomon warned, he would send against him a force that no one could withstand. When the king received the letter, he flew into a rage. How dare someone like Solomon speak to him that way? At that time, Dahish was the one assigned to guard the idol that Solomon had to destroy. When the king consulted his ministers on the matter, they advised him to seek the counsel of the god he worshipped, that is, the idol. At that moment, pride overtook the jinn Dahish. Believing the army under his command was powerful enough to withstand Solomon's forces, he transformed himself into the image of the idol and spoke in a lofty, thunderous tone. "As for me, I do not fear him, for I am wise in every realm. If he seeks war, I shall advance and swiftly snatch his soul from him." When the king heard the idol speak for the first time, he was stunned and utterly convinced that victory was his. Emboldened, he sent Solomon a letter, filled with arrogance and defiance, refusing to obey the prophet's command. In response, the prophet Solomon, peace be upon him, dispatched a mighty army composed of humans, jinn, birds, and beasts. Leading them was the vizier of the jinn. They descended upon the island where the tyrant king resided, and a fierce battle erupted, lasting 2 full days. On the third day, Dahish himself emerged, demanding a duel with the jinn vizier. But the moment the fight began, Dahish was stunned by the overwhelming strength of his opponent. As his army began to crumble and the kingdom teetered on the edge of collapse, Dahish fled in panic. He roamed the earth for 3 months, until the jinn vizier finally caught him and imprisoned him deep beneath the ground. And so, Dahish remained trapped, ever since, with no one to free him. Upon hearing the jinn's tale, Musa ibn Nusayr was filled with awe at the grandeur of Solomon's kingdom. He left Dahish to his fate, gathered his army, and continued their journey deeper into the desert. Days passed, and the expedition reached its 4th month, traversing the sea of sand, until one day they came upon a massive mountain. From behind it shone an intense, golden yellow light. The traveler exclaimed, "Rejoice! That must be the reflection of the city of copper." They pressed onward for several more days, until they found themselves before towering walls made entirely of solid copper. Musa ordered one of his horsemen to ride around the perimeter in search of an entrance, while he and the rest of the troops camped by the walls, awaiting news. After an absence of 3 nights, the knight finally returned, but to their disappointment, he brought troubling news. The city had no gates at all. Musa then ordered the digging of a tunnel beneath the ground, hoping it might grant them access to the interior. But to their surprise, the deeper they dug, the deeper the wall extended into the earth, until they eventually hit groundwater. Even then, they couldn't get past the wall. It was then that Musa realized the situation was far more complex than he had imagined. With no other options left, Musa decided they would have to climb the wall itself. But given the wall's massive size, the first step was to find the lowest point to minimize the effort and danger. So he sent a group of his knights to circle the wall again, in search of a spot that might be easier to scale. 3 days later, the knights returned and informed him that the best place to climb was, ironically, the very spot they had been camping in. Musa said, "So be it. Let's prepare." He then ordered that all their belongings, wood, crates, tools, be stacked together to form a makeshift mound that might help bring them closer to the wall's edge. Despite their hard work, they didn't even reach a quarter of the wall's height. So Musa instructed some of his knights to return to the oasis they had passed earlier, which was full of trees, and to cut down enough wood to build proper ladders. Days passed, and the soldiers began crafting the ladders. With each completed section, they tied it to the previous one, and eventually, the ladder stretched high enough to reach the top of the wall. Musa stood at the foot of the ladder and called out to his men, "Who among you will volunteer to climb this wall and bring us news from the city?" One brave man stepped forward and, without hesitation, began his ascent. When he reached the top, he stood still, stunned by what he saw, then suddenly burst out laughing. Before uttering a single word, he leapt over the wall and vanished into the city. Panic gripped the soldiers. No one could understand what had just happened. Why had he laughed? What had he seen that made him throw himself over the edge like that? As they stood there, in stunned silence, strange sounds began echoing from inside the city, only deepening their fear. Musa noticed the growing unrest among the soldiers, so he quickly tried to calm them, saying, "There's no need for fear. Your comrade might still be alive inside. There's no reason to panic." Then he called out once more, "Who among you will volunteer to climb? I will reward him with 1,000 dinars if he returns with news." Another man stepped forward and said, "I'll go up and tell you everything I see." But Musa firmly warned him not to do as the others had done. Despite the warning, as soon as the man reached the top of the wall, the same scene unfolded. He looked briefly, laughed, then jumped into the city. At that moment, Musa was certain that something strange was happening on the other side of the wall, but he chose not to share his suspicion with the soldiers, fearing it would spark panic among them. So he raised his voice and called out a third time, "Whoever climbs this time will receive a reward of 100,000 dinars, and I promise to personally care for his family and children for the rest of their lives." A third man came forward and said, "I accept, but on one condition. Tie a strong rope around my waist. If it looks like I'm about to jump, pull me back immediately before I hit the ground on the other side." Musa agreed, and the man was securely tied. Then he began to climb the ladder, but as soon as he reached the top, he forgot everything. He stood there at the edge of the wall, laughing and clapping without any reason, in a scene that sent shivers down the spines of those watching. His comrades at the base of the wall shouted to him, begging him to come down, but he didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge their voices. Then, like the others, he threw himself toward the city, but this time, they had pulled the rope in time, and they heard his terrified screams even as he laughed hysterically. Moments later, the rope returned to them, empty. This horrifying scene struck fear deep into the hearts of the soldiers, who began pleading with Musa to end the journey and take them back home. What had happened to their comrades was proof enough. Whatever lay beyond that wall was beyond their strength and far more powerful than anything they could face. And deep down, Musa knew that what was happening behind the wall was nothing but the result of Jinn, or sorcery, and that the soldiers' weak faith would inevitably lead to their defeat. So he was forced to make the difficult decision to end the mission and turn back. As they began gathering their belongings and preparing to depart, the traveler stepped forward from among the ranks and said to Musa, "I will be the one to climb the wall." Musa replied, "You are our guide. If something happens to you, we'll have no way to find our way back." But the traveler insisted, "Let me try." After his persistence, Musa finally agreed and said, "Climb, I trust you." The traveler began to climb, and once he reached the top of the wall, he stopped, completely still, not moving a muscle. Then he sat on the edge, remaining silent for a long time, unresponsive to anyone, calling out to him. They shouted his name over and over, but there was no answer. After a full hour of this strange stillness, he suddenly stood up and shouted down to them, "Rejoice, rejoice, for there is good news." He began walking along the top of the wall until he reached one of the watchtowers surrounding the city. There he found a bronze knight, and inscribed on the knight's spear was the phrase, "If you seek to enter, rub my hand." So the traveler rubbed the knight's hand, and a hidden door in the city wall swung open. Musa entered the city, and as soon as his feet touched its ground, he was stunned by what he saw. Hundreds of corpses, men, women, and children, lay scattered across the streets, as if they had thrown themselves from the top of the wall, exactly as his soldiers had done. As soon as the traveler descended from the wall, Musa rushed to him and asked, "What happened? How did you resist the urge to jump like the others?" The traveler replied, "The secret is in faith. When I climbed the wall and looked into the city, I saw a courtyard that looked like a piece of paradise, towering trees, palms, fluttering birds, and a clear, flowing river. Then beautiful women appeared, calling my name, tempting me to come down to the river and join them. I almost gave in, but I tried to lower my gaze. Each time I resisted, one of them disappeared. When I fully regained control over myself, the true image of the city began to emerge. The gardens and trees vanished, replaced by a barren, solid ground, and the river was actually a stream of corpses. But at that moment, my body was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I struggled until the paralysis in my body dissolved, and I was finally able to move. After they entered the city, Musa and the soldiers walked a little through its deserted streets until they reached a great, magnificent palace. Musa ordered part of the soldiers to wait outside the palace and took the rest inside with him. The moment their feet touched the palace floor, they were astonished by what they saw. Treasures and jewels beyond count or measure, things their eyes had never seen before. Musa gave them permission to take whatever they wished, and took some himself to carry back to the king as proof that he had entered the legendary city. After a brief tour inside the palace, they arrived at a large, luxurious hall, clearly the main throne room where the palace owner sat. There, they saw an elaborate throne, atop which sat a real woman, fully intact, wearing a dress encrusted with precious stones, sitting with wide-open eyes that didn't blink. Beside her stood two huge guards, but their bodies were decayed, as if time itself had consumed them. At first, Musa thought the woman was still alive, and greeted her. The traveler laughed and said, "My lord, she has been dead for a long time." Musa approached to see for himself, and beside the woman, he found a letter that read, "Greetings to whoever manages to reach this palace. You may take whatever treasures you wish, except for the jewels worn by this queen. Whoever dares to take them shall face doom." Musa read the letter aloud to the soldiers, and all of them replied, "Obedience and submission," except for one man. The moment his eyes fell on the crown adorning the queen's head, he couldn't look away. Mockingly, he said to Musa, "They're dead. What can they do to me?" Then he reached out and snatched the crown from her head. But as he turned to leave, he collided with one of the decayed guards and fell on him. A sword pierced his body, killing him instantly. Realizing the danger, Musa shouted to the soldiers, "We've taken enough. Let's get out of here." They rushed out of the palace and walked through the city until they reached a small lake. But what awaited them was even more surprising. A giant man was standing on the surface of the water. They asked him in amazement, "Who are you, and how do you stand on water?" He replied, "I am a Jinn imprisoned in this lake for hundreds of years. When I heard your voices, I thought you were the righteous man." They asked, "And who is this righteous man?" He said, "He is a pious man with a cheerful face who comes here from time to time, sits by the lake, and prays." When Musa asked for his name, the Jinn did not answer. Instead, he vanished suddenly. After the soldiers had rested briefly by the lake, Musa gathered them and continued their journey. After some time walking, they reached a massive stone slab, inscribed with a list of great men's names. Just a few steps away from the slab, they found a bronze statue of a man holding a shield, with an inscription that read, "There is no doctrine behind me, so turn back, and do not enter this land, lest you perish." Musa, realizing the message was clear and left no room for interpretation, decided to take the soldiers and completely change their course, heading toward a different region. Musa and his soldiers arrived at a secluded island on the seashore. As they approached, they were met by a group of short-statured, dark-skinned people, speaking in a strange dialect the soldiers could not understand. But Musa immediately understood that they had finally reached the place he was tasked to find by the king's command. Soon after, the island's king appeared and spoke to them in a language they understood. Then he addressed Musa directly and asked, "Are you from the Jinn, or are you human?" Musa replied, "We are human." The king then inquired about the reason for their journey to this distant land. Musa recounted the entire story, explaining that they came by the king's orders. Upon hearing this, the king commanded a group of fishermen to go out to sea and return with bottles filled with water, along with some treasures and goods abundant on the island. He handed all of it to Musa and instructed him to deliver it to the king. Thus, Musa and the remaining soldiers returned to the king's palace, carrying the bottles and treasures. Musa recounted everything that had happened on the journey, from their departure until they reached the secluded island. The king listened in awe, curiosity flooding him so much that it was as if he was seeing the scenes unfold before his own eyes. Finally, he ordered a grand reward for Musa and all those who accompanied him, a reward worthy of the dangers and horrors they had faced. The king opened one of the bottles, and out emerged a mighty genie. The king stared at it for a long time, silently wishing he had embarked on that adventure himself, instead of hearing about it second-hand from the mouths of men.